those called the Apocrypha books, or Deuterocanonical books found in the Bibles. It dovetails well after the book of Tobit, which we just completed a study on. This is really it's a book of 16 chapters, but the story moves very quickly and so on. And I hope that we will be able to complete this in about 2 weeks. That would be like a record. 2 months, and you want me to string it out? I can do that too for you. So, if you find the Book of Judith in your Bibles, if you find it easily, it's a Catholic Bible. If you find it difficult to find it, you might not have a Catholic Bible. Usually it's positioned right after Tobit. They kind of dovetail. You know, along with the book of Esther and Ruth, these are the only books in the Bible that are named after women, or have women as the heroines. Truly, this book is a book of faithfulness and courage and heroism on the part of this woman known as Judith. You know, I have one of the non-Catholic Bible sources that I use is an old Revised Standard Version Bible, Oxford edition. So it did have the 7 extra books in the Old Testament, and actually I got it as a high schooler because it was one of the few Bibles at that time that had notes, footnotes to give you insight. And introduction to the book, and the introduction to the book of Ruth in that Bible, it says, obviously this is a work of fiction. The atmosphere of the tale is entirely realistic. It's a masterpiece of ancient Jewish narrative art. So the RSV, at least the Oxford edition, identified this book, which was in the apocryphal section of that Bible, as a masterpiece of ancient Jewish narrative art. The basic plot of the story: an Israelite town called Bethulia is besieged by Holofernes, the commander-in-chief of the Syrian army under King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, the town elders despair of help from God, and they declare, if deliverance doesn't happen in 5 days, they will surrender to the army and this general. Judith, a beautiful widow lady, observant Jewess, upon hearing their decision, scolds the elders for their lack of faith. She prays, placing herself in the hands of God, and she prepares her weapon against the invading army: her beauty. The plot becomes intriguing. She goes unmolested into the Assyrian army camp, right to the chief, whom she beguiles with her beauty, and then at night assassinates him, and thus delivers her people. That's the basic plot. Okay, let's go home. Oh yeah. Now, first of all, it's identified as the book of Judith. The word Judith basically, literally can be translated as Jewish woman. Okay? And one commentary says that she is like a composite of all the women in Israelite history who have saved their people at a time of crisis. She's like a composite of all the characteristics of Jewish women who in Bible history, salvation history, saved their people, Israel, at a time of crisis. Now, even though it starts out in the 12th year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the Assyrians, in the great city of Nineveh, and then it goes on, Arphaxad ruled the Medes and Ecbatana around this city, built walls, and so on. It sounds like it really starts out setting a historical context and framework. But we are told that this history is all wrong. So the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Nebuchadnezzar, of course, was a king. He's an important king in other books of the Bible. Nebuchadnezzar. Now, indeed, he was a Middle Eastern king from 604 to 562 BC. Okay, reigned a long time. He was mostly identified in Hebrew history as what? King of Babylon, connected with what?
The exile.
History. The exile of the Jews. Okay, right? Bringing about the exile of the Jews. But his capital was Babylon. The capital of Assyria was
Nineveh, right?
Nineveh, that's right. And so, and we talked about this before. The Assyrian Empire was was probably the first great empires of the Middle East, about the 8th century. Its capital city was Nineveh. Today, it's called, the main city is Mosul.
Mosul.
You didn't know that?
Yes.
You did know it. And the province that Mosul is in is called Nineveh province yet today. Like we call this Wisconsin as a state. Okay? So it's still called Nineveh. But that was the capital. And of course, Nebuchadnezzar is identified as Babylonian king. And his main city was Babylon. Okay? Which is also in both of those places in present-day Iraq. Now, in fact, the Assyrian capital was overrun and destroyed not by Nebuchadnezzar, but by his father Nabopolassar in 612 BC. And with that was a subsequent rise in the Middle East of the powers of Babylon and Babylonia. But the armies and governance that King Nebuchadnezzar had wasn't identified with Syria. The Syrian Empire by that time had been overrun by the Babylonians, thanks to Nebuchadnezzar's father. Now, this is going to talk about the Western peoples. And of course, I don't know, where's my map? situate it for you folks that there's folks that are geographically challenged. Okay, so the area of the two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates, present-day country of Iraq, they go up to Asia Minor, what we call today Turkey. This area, and then this is called the Fertile Crescent. This whole, because it forms like a crescent. There were trade routes predating even Father Abraham in the Bible. Okay, so Nineveh, capital of Assyria, is here, and we even hear of in the present-day news when they talk about the attack on Mosul in Iraq about crossing the Tigris River. So Nineveh was on the west side of the Tigris River, north end of the Tigris River. Babylon is down here. Babylonia is on the Euphrates River in southern. Okay? You with me so far? Where is Ur? Ur of the Chaldeans is said to be the place where Father Abraham came. It's in southern Iraq, right about there. Okay? It's situated on this map right here. Now, in this description, it mentioned that the king of the Medes, which was another separate cultural group, and actually the capital city, which we heard of in the book of Tobit, for the Medes, was Ecbatana. And it's situated right here, Ecbatana, in kind of north-central, present-day Iran. So even back in ancient biblical times, yeah, they were different cultural people between what we call Arabians today and Iraqis. Okay, even back in ancient times, they were different cultural peoples that didn't get along. Okay, so this, it predates, by 1200, 1500, even more years. The Muslim incursion and Muslims taking it over. So it has nothing to do with that. There was animosity way before that. In here, this is Nebuchadnezzar sets himself up as a god. So, and it says that he had success overrunning the Mede, the king of the Medes. Well, that's kind of anachronistic. Most of what's given here as history, historical setting, is an anachronistic. It's not to be taken. Okay? It's just to plop these people in Judith, in the story of Judith, into a time period. Okay? You talk about a work of historical biblical fiction. This is historical biblical fiction. And even the history and geography is fiction. Okay? The king of the Medes was not overrun by Nebuchadnezzar. The king of the Medes and the Median Empire was overrun by the Persians, King Cyrus, after Nebuchadnezzar. They also overran Babylon and broke the back of the Babylonian Empire. Now, in chapter 2 already, after having success, so as this is brought about, having success, Nebuchadnezzar, again, in the 18th year of the 22nd day of the first month, there was a discussion in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians. Remember, he's not an Assyrian, and not king of them. Took revenge on the whole world as he had threatened. Now, This is the closest thing to a historical fact. The timing within the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar, which would put the identification right around 587. Now, 587, in terms of a biblical fact, there's something significant, 587 BC, that Nebuchadnezzar did.
Destruction of the temple.
Huh?
Destruction of the temple.
Okay, the conquering of Jerusalem and the destruction of the first temple. And carrying the Israelite echelons off, the beginning of the exile, Babylonian exile, right? So, this date that's given at the beginning of chapter 2, it corresponds to 587 BC, and it corresponds to that. Yet, later on in this book, it'll say something about after the exile of the Jews. So, the writer either don't care or really doesn't have the history down, or the history of the Jews is not important other than as a framework for the story. Okay, but he does employ a commander-in-chief who's introduced in chapter 2 around verse 14. His name is Holofernes. Who? Holofernes. Who is the general, you might say, or commander-in-chief of Nebuchadnezzar's army. And so let's look at chapter 2, verse 14. So Holofernes left the presence of the Lord and summoned all the princes and generals and officers of the Assyrian army. He mustered 120,000 picked troops, as his Lord had commanded, and 12,000 mounted archers, and grouped them into a complete combat force. He took along a very large number of camels and asses and mules for their baggage, innumerable sheep, cattle, and goats for their food supply, abundant provisions for each man, and much gold and silver from the royal palace. Then he and his whole army proceeded in their expedition in advance of King Nebuchadnezzar to cover all the western region with their chariots and cavalry and their regular infantry, a huge regular force, too many to count. Well, if there's too many to count, how come you said it was 120,000? Like locusts on the dust of the earth went along with them. So there's a lot of, should we say, Middle Eastern hyperbole here, exaggeration, and also, even today, when they fight with one another over there, they'll say something like, and your rivers will run red with your blood, because we're going to do, this and that. Yeah, right. Okay, so it goes way back, this exaggeration as a threat. So you see, the thing is, he mounts not only a huge force of fighting men, but also the supply chain, and everything's in place for him to go and do what Nebuchadnezzar wants him to do, and that is to wreak havoc on the peoples to the east. So this campaign supposedly is well directed. Now, chapter 3, see, we're going very quickly here. Oh, before we get into chapter 3, the literary setting for this. Okay. The Book of Judith is written. The Book of Judith is probably written around somewhere between 175 and 105 BC. Now, 175 and 105 BC. Now, we have some people here who are pretty well versed in Bible history, salvation history, in the land of the Jews and so on. What people were conquering the Jews at that time in the place that we call Israel today?
The Greeks.
Not Romans yet. Greeks.
Greeks, yeah.
The Greeks.
The Hellenistic.
Yeah. And particularly Antiochus IV Epiphanes. He came to power in Syria and Palestine, and he was forcing, at that time, Greek and Hellenistic culture on the Jews, and wanted them to adopt the Greek ways and thinking, and the worship of all those Greek gods that we had to study in our early years of high school. Greek mythology. Never did quite understand why, but until later on. But, you know, he was inflicting upon them to abandon circumcision, dietary laws, and so on. The plight of the Jewish people at that time is accounted in two other works that are called Apocrypha, 1st and 2nd Maccabees. Okay, with any amount of luck, we might get to those before summer. But the bottom line is this. When the Book of Judith was written, during basically what was called the Maccabean revolt against the Greeks, that would be the real literary historical setting. And so the aspect of fear amongst the Jewish people that is found in this book, the aspect of being basically, you think you're strong, but really you're powerless against this army that has come in and so on. That is all present. The other problem with this book is the author is unnamed and unknown. There's nothing in this book that gives a hint at who the author is. We can analyze basically the time period that it was written. And it was probably written in the Hebrew originally, but it's come down to us only in the Greek form. And it's one of the Greek forms of this text that has been part of the canonical Bible in the Catholic Bibles. Okay, if you read the introductions, particularly to the New Jerusalem Bible of Judith, and be careful because in the New Jerusalem Bible, the introduction to the Book of Judith is also part of the introduction to Tobit and some other books. So it'll start talking about Judith and then go to Tobit and then go to Judith, and you got to read beyond just one paragraph. In the New American Bible, they give a nice little few sentences about that historical background and the authorship and what texts were used. Now, outline of Judith. Let's get back to the text. So, the Assyrian threats. God bless you. Let's see, I told you quite a bit about this already. Basically, in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar orders revenge on the whole world. And he starts this campaign. And we looked at the campaign that this man Holofernes is put in front of it. Incidentally, and the name Hall of Furnace, there's. It seems like the origin of that name is not Babylonian. The origin of that name is basically Persian. There was a Persian general with a name that was kind of like that. Now, the Persians conquered the Babylonians, so it was much later. So even he, who becomes an important foil against Judith and in this story, even he is basically, historically anachronistic. Doesn't belong there. It's from another time period. Who knows? Maybe they had time travel back then. Okay? No, they couldn't have. They didn't have telephone booths. So, that's a reference to a little British, series. Rolly. That's because you're real smart. That's why I always try to sit near you, Rolly. In grade school. Always try to copy from him because he was so smart. He wouldn't do it. I'm embarrassing my buddy. Okay, sorry. So, beginning of chapter 3, they therefore set out messengers when they began to move across the Fertile Crescent into the lands that we would call Syria and Palestine today. And some of the cities that are mentioned at the end of chapter 2, they were concerned, so they went to the general and tried to sue for peace. And what sets this up as more of a religious book in terms of there's an evil characterized by King Nebuchadnezzar and his general Holofernes versus the good guys, the Israelites, Judah. So the other cities kowtow to him. Now, chapter 3, verse 5. After a spokesman had reached Holofernes and given him the message, he went down with his armies to the sea coast, that means Mediterranean sea coast, stationed garrisons in the fortified towns. From them he picked troops as auxiliaries. The people of these cities and all the inhabitants of the countryside received him with garlands and dancing to the sounds of timbrels. Nevertheless, he devastated their whole territory. He cut down their sacred groves, for he had been commissioned to destroy all the gods of the earth, so that every nation might worship Nebuchadnezzar alone, and every people and tribe invoke him as God. So, well, there's a megalomania, we would say, but it portrays Nebuchadnezzar as a divine being and as an idol to worship. Now, this passage that we just read out, those of you who were military men, how many were military men here? Do we have a number of former military people? Okay. What does scorched earth policy mean?
Everything in your path. Destroy.
You destroy everything in your path. Burn it down. Kill all the people. Okay, scorched earth policy. What is described here? Nevertheless, he devastated their whole territory, cut down their sacred groves, for he had been commissioned to destroy all the gods, and another place it says he will destroy all their shrines as well. This is spiritual scorched earth policy. And the groves, ancient peoples, number one, they build shrines to their various gods on the high points. There's a lot of, especially in Judea and Samaria, a lot of ridges and high points. Those who have traveled to the Holy Land, you see that. And some of those ancient shrines, the remnants, the ruins are still up there. But they also planted certain kinds of trees, certain trees to signify their worship of certain gods. Okay, so the cutting down of trees was both a scorched earth policy to wipe out the powers of their gods and goddesses, okay? But also, it was a military tactic to, you take out the trees, and if they're fruit-bearing trees,
sustenance.
yeah, you undercut their food source or food sustenance. If they're not, if they have symbolic meaning, and you cut it down, then you cut the people off from what they hold as a sacred area. You devastate their sacred areas. Okay, if they use trees as sacred areas. Yeah. Who was it? Saint Boniface, right? Wasn't it Saint Boniface who went to the Germanic tribes and they had a sacred tree and he went and cut it down and nothing happened to him, so he converted the German barbaric tribes and so on. Wasn't that one of the stories that I think it was Saint Boniface? Yeah. Okay, it's a similar kind of thing. So that's what's going on here. It's like a spiritual scorched earth principle that he's involved in, and putting in its place the king that he represents. Holofernes as his men doing it. Plus, stop to think of it, they need a lot of wood if you have a big entourage like that, so they resupply their wood supplies. So now, that's the campaign. So the army is described as then coming to rest. Verse 9, at length Holofernes reached Esdraelon in the neighborhood of Dothan, the approach to the main ridge of the Judean mountains. And he set up his camp between Gibeah and Scythopolis and stayed there a whole month to refurbish all the equipment of his army. So, where is this? What is it? Well, the plain of Esdraelon is very, very important. And in the history of the Jewish people, there's a lot of significant battles that took place on the plain of Esdraelon. Where is the plain of Esdraelon? South of the Sea of Galilee, going towards the Mediterranean Sea, is a flat, fertile plain. Right here, just before the beginning, the approaches to the Judean mountain range. Right in here. Okay? It extends for about 35, 40 miles, and it's probably 15 miles wide. Okay? In ancient times, that was the bread basket for the people of Palestine. Canaanite people, not Canadian, Canaanite people and Israelite people. Okay? Now, it's on this plain, for instance, the first king of Israel, King Saul, and his son Jonathan, were killed at the Battle of Gilboa in the Book of Kings, first book of Samuel. That's indicated here. So there's a water source, a river, kind of a river and streams and water sources bubbling up, springs that are bubbling up here on the plain of Esdraelon. Okay. There are some other significant battles too. When the Assyrians first came down from way up where I showed you before, Nineveh. When they first came down, they were stopped at one point, again by a woman, on the plain of Ezra. So, and it is believed by the description given in the book of Revelations, the final battle between good and evil will happen there on the plain of Ezra. Okay, yes.
It's just a vicarious experience as we gallop through this landform in this history. Think of how many miles it was from where they started to where they are now. And if we place this 120,000 men, all the followers, all the animals, I mean, how long did this take? And what really was happening to this landform during that period of time, and the changes in the psyche of the people?
Well, you know, of course, everything is exaggerated.
Right, that's what I said, vicariously.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, is exaggerated here, you know. And like it said, in the earlier chapter 1 actually, when it talks about how Nebuchadnezzar's army defeated the king of Media, and he said they traveled from Nineveh to Ecbatana in 3 days. Well, that's 300 miles. Yeah.
Even a tank corps won't make it in there.
Yeah, really. Even a tank corps today can't do that. So, they climbed. Now, there's another character that's introduced. And it's kind of strange. Starting at 4 and 5, chapter 5, it was reported to Holofernes, the commander-in-chief of the Assyrian army, the Israelites were ready to do battle and had blocked the mountain passes and fortified the high peaks. And so he said, now tell me, you Canaanites, what sort of people is this that dwells in the mountains, and so on. So, we introduce another foil, Anchior. And he's described as Ammonite, as an Ammonite. What does that mean? Well, what's the capital of Jordan today? Amman. So Ammani, you know, it's named that after the Ammonite people. Ammonite people are described even in the earlier books of Genesis as people living in basically what we know as Jordan today. Okay? So, and basically he would have been a distant relative through, who was it? Through Esau to the Hebrews. So the big portion of this, chapter 5, you can read it yourself, starting from verse 5, he goes through basically the history of the Hebrew people at that time. It's really, really kind of interesting because what's going on here is this person who has familiarity, having been a part of a sociological group of people living next to the Hebrews and Israelite people, possibly distant relatives of them, of the people, God's people, and he's giving inside information to the commander-in-chief of this invading army force. And so, and if you take a look at it, there's a number of things that are mentioned here that in itself is anachronistic. But look at verse 20. After he recounts the history, he tells them how this group, came out of Egypt, and their God inflicted plagues on the Egyptians, and they settled in the land of the Amorites, and they defeated them, and they expelled the Canaanites and the Perizzites and Jebusites and Shechemites and Gergonites and Hermites and Stalagmites and stalactites, and
You're
So-
getting geological now.
yeah. So verse 20. So now, Lord and Master, this is Angkor addressing Holofernes, the capital. If these people are at fault and are sinning against their God, and if we verify this offense of theirs, then they shall be able to go up, we shall be able to go up and conquer them. But if they are not a guilty nation, then your lordship should keep his distance. Otherwise, their Lord and God will shield them, and we will become a laughing stock of the whole world. So he concluded his speech basically that way. And Holofernes and his generals and officers said, we're not afraid of the Israelites. Verse 23, they are a powerless people, incapable of any strong defense. Let us go attack them. And then Holofernes himself turns to this Angkor, and in the presence of his whole council, and chapter 6, when the noise of the crowd settled down in the council had subsided, Holofernes, commander-in-chief of the Assyrian army, said to Anchior, who are you, Anchior, to prophesy among us, as you've done today, and to tell us not to fight against the Israelites because their God protects them? What God is there besides Nebuchadnezzar? He will send his force and destroy them from the face of the earth. Their God will not save them. But we, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, will strike them down as one man, for they will be unable to withstand the force of our cavalry. And we will overwhelm them with it. And the mountains shall be drunk with their blood, and their plains filled with their corpses. And not a trace of them will survive our attack, and they shall utterly be perished, says King Nebuchadnezzar, Lord of all the earth, for he has spoken, and his words shall not remain unfulfilled. For I am the great Wizard of Oz. It almost sounds like that. So, now, you think they would have taken this Angkor and just cut his head off, because, he spoke so arrogantly to them. But they asked for his, spy report anyhow. But they don't. What do they do? They bind him, and they take him, Anchior, to the foothills where the Israelite people are, the foothills of Judea up here. And right outside this little village, Bethulia, they deposit him, basically, and the Israelites come down and they sling stones from the high ridges, on the army guys. But they leave Anchior there, thinking that, maybe he'll end up getting hit in the head with a stone and get killed too. But he doesn't. And the Israelites take him down and take him up into their village, Bethulia, and he gives them, like a spy report, of Holofernes, army and so on. And so, you can read about that. And so the response by the people, the Israelite people, they praise Holofernes and they praise their God. Chapter 6, verse 18. At this point, the people fell prostrate. They worshiped God. They cried out, Lord, God of heaven. And that's an early name for the God of Israel. Behold their arrogance. Have pity on the lowliness of your people. Look in favor of this day on those who are consecrated to you. And then they assured Anchior and praised him highly. And Uzziah, he's like the main mayor or the main guy, brought him from the assembly to his home, and they gave him a great banquet with all the elders, and that whole night they called upon the God of Israel for help. And that sets the stage. Oh, don't start clapping yet. That sets the stage. Because the people of Bethulia praised God, the God of heaven, and prayed to God for help. But we will see the next time we gather, they pray to God for help, but also they try to take what seems to be humanly sensible steps. And they plot to surrender to the great force. Thank you very much for coming, everyone.
See, we're just flying through this.
Leave it alone. That's the same thing that was said about Jesus and his trial.
Yeah.